two battle carrier groups were sent to the Persian Gulf. I think it was the USS Nimitz and then the Gerald Ford, or I can remember. Another one's the Abraham Lincoln, which is going to, I don't remember, the names might be mixed up, but one's going to southern Israel to protect Israel. But kind of interesting time to be in right now, and bringing us up for a reason, because we need to pray about this. As Jane said, yes, wars and rumors of wars, but this one has kind of been one long in the making. So I don't know if you all know the history of Iran very much, but in 1979, the Shah of Iran, which was more of a secular government, non-religious or less religious by far, let's say secular, was overthrown and toppled by Muslims, by the current Islamic regime, and it's been in power for whatever it was since 1979, and yesterday, we heard reports that the ruling Ayatollah, among other important leaders, were killed in an early 4-hour strike, which is, no one's crying for the loss of the mullahs. And I don't know if you know this, but Iran's long been, there's bad blood between the United States and Iran, because there was, in 1983, the Iranians bombed a barracks in Beirut and killed 241 soldiers. And there's also the USS Tripoli and other events. Actually, Trump outlined it in one of his 8-minute speeches, but there's basically some history between Iran and terrorism in Iran and the United States. And Iran has long funded proxy terror groups against Israel. One's called Hamas, another one Hezbollah in the north. Hezbollah means party of God. Hezbollah. And actually, I saw some of the exchanges of fire when I was in Israel on the south. I saw Hamas launching. Actually, I think it was between Egypt, but they're always at war with each other. But Egypt and Hamas were launching artillery against one another. This is at daylight. And I'd left, and then 6 weeks after that, I was told by some of my Israeli friends over there that was basically like watching fireworks in the sky. That's how much fire there was over in Ashkelon, where I was. Anyway, why I bring this up is because, yes, the military strikes seemed to have been a resounding success in the beginning. And again, no one's crying for the loss of the mullahs, because they were very oppressive and they were killing people that were revolting against them. But it's, as I've learned getting older, it's a little bit, maybe I want to turn the camera a little bit. It looks like it's angled. Okay, it's good. Joshua says no. But anyway, following the loss of leadership, that's what I'm concerned about now, is because what happens next? Who takes over? Do we have an even more radical Islamic group, or do we have civil war, or do we have the what some CIA officers are calling out for is the launching or the green lighting of cell groups, terror cell groups, maybe within the United States? So I'm issuing kind of a warning to all you all in the United States here, or in areas that are, quote, target areas. Be vigilant, be watchful, because it may not be over yet, and there could be some local retaliation. It could be, I've heard discussion of attacks on possibly a power grid or the water supply. Will this happen? I have no idea, but you can't take anything for granted in this day and age. So anyway, that's something we'll pray for before you start. And Heavenly Father, we just come before you now, Lord, and as our sister Jane said, it's wars and rumors of wars. Whatever happens, we always need to be kind of vigilant, and if not for political reasons, at least for spiritual reasons, because there will be a season and times, as recorded in the Book of Revelations, where there will be really, really, really bad times. It might come in the form of wars or famine, earthquakes, or whatever, or a combination of thereof. And we need to be vigilant, Lord, watchful, because we are the salt and light of the world, the ones that have called on Yeshua. We need to be encouragement. We need to be lighthouses, points of light. We need to point people towards you, because a lot of people aren't going to know what to do. In the end times, people will be fearing. They'll be hiding under rocks, saying, fall on me, I want to die, I don't know what to do. And people will be really, really freaked out that don't know you. So help us be that salt and light, Lord. But in order to do that, we need to have our own affairs in order first. We need to have our own spiritual walks aligned with you, Lord. So we pray, Lord, that you'll invade our hearts, guide us, correct us, lead us where we should be going, so that we can be that salt and light that the world will need. That spiritual salt and light. I mean, people will be really, really hungry when times get bad. It does happen quite fast. So we pray this in Yeshua's name. Amen. All right, let's rise for the Shema. You all know this one. Again, I'm going to amend this soon, where we'll change add a little bit now. But for now, 3, 2, 1, go. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you rise up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses, on your gates. Amen. We say this not to be religious, but to simply remind us about what the most important thing is that we should be doing in our spiritual walk. It's love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. And then later on, Yeshua says, love your neighbors yourself. You do those, you've nailed all the law and the prophets. It's okay, I've got it. Thank you. So welcome. As you can see as a title here, we're going to begin a short series on the book of Esther. I was really tempted to start a series on the book of Revelations, like end times. Just out of curiosity, how many of you would be interested in end times? Show of hands, yes? Okay. I will probably get to it relatively soon. And I wanted to do some talk on the Old Testament too. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and do some messages on Old Testament prophets as they feed into or relate to the book of Revelations. But I'll probably reopen a series on Revelations. Not today, but the reason why I did not do so is because as I was starting to study for a sermon, I got reminded by the fact on how famously difficult it is to teach Revelations. If you do it wrong, it's very entertaining. If you do it right, Book of Revelations, our study of the Book of Revelations is actually pretty boring. And I'll try my best to make it clear and interpretable. But given the precariousness of the times, I think, yeah, it's something that's required to be done. The Book of Revelation, real quick, before I jump into Esther, is some people don't like to touch Revelations. I've always kind of been interested in it in times, but a lot of people don't like it because it's discouraging. But one important function of the Book of Revelations, maybe the most important function of it, is to shake believers out of the spiritual apathy that they might be in. It's to remind you, end times are coming, be ready, be ready, be ready. That's not to make you fatalistic, or I can't do anything about it, and to go hide in a rock. It's supposed to snap you out of like the comforts of the world and prepare you for what will come. Because at one point, God's going to close the door on the world of sin, and believers have to be ready to go out and have a relationship with God and share their faith and live out their faith with others. So that said, we're going to be in Esther. Anyone want to guess why? Just randomly, why I picked this one? No, clueless. Yeah, it's a woman. Okay. All my Jewish friends, my Jewish viewers would know this because tomorrow is Purim. You guys ever heard of Purim? Purim? It means, I think if I'm an Akkadian word, it means lot, but it's a Jewish holiday that celebrates the salvation of the Jews from sudden doom, as recorded in the Book of Esther. So that's tomorrow, the actual holiday is tomorrow. So I figured, okay, it's a good time to learn a little bit more about this. And this is an Old Testament book. So, hey, let's do it. And yeah, I guess you can say she's a woman too. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to be concise on this. Actually, it's kind of a tricky book to teach because it's easy. In many ways, it's a very readable book, and you don't really need a message on it if you just kind of follow it yourself. So you can read through it, and there's not a lot of interpretive difficulties in it. But I'll try and give you some things to think about that you wouldn't have gathered if you just read it yourself. Esther occurs, it's an interesting book, and it occurs during an interesting time in Jewish history. Esther, I think, is a Persian word. Persia is modern-day Iran, where, the United States attacked right now. And Esther is in that region. It means, I think it's a Persian word. It means star. And it might have derived from the goddess Ishtar. Anyone know her Hebrew name? No. Hadassah. Hadassah, that's her name. So that's actually her true name. And that means myrtle tree or myrtle branch. Any of you read through the Book of Kings or Chronicles? Yep. No? Okay, we got to do a series on that too. I should read through that. What is it chronicle, roughly? What would you say those two books or those four books are about? First Kings, Second Kings, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles?
Pretty sure those about like chapters of like the kings and their lives and what they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what it's about. It's about the kings, the monarchy of Israel. Actually, both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. How was it? How'd they do, the Jews, during that time? Poorly. The Jews lived dismal. They failed the Mosaic. They broke the Mosaic law over and over and over and over and over and over again. In fact, if you read it, there's only, I think, 7 kings in the south that were considered good kings. All the other kings, 20 kings in the north, 20 kings in the south, were otherwise bad. So in those books, Kings and Chronicles, you'll see generations of God's people, the Jews, committing all kinds of idolatry, pagan idolatry, sexual morality, murder, you name it, they've done it. So basically they were dismal failure. And because of that, God says, I'm going to judge you if you don't stop. I'm going to judge you if you don't stop, as recorded in the Mosaic law. But they didn't, and so God says, okay, I now have to put into effect my judgments. So actually it's recorded here. Let's do the first slide here. Deuteronomy chapter 28. I'll read 2 verses here. Notice what God says here. If you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commandments and decrees I'm giving you today, these curses, okay, if you read through Deuteronomy chapter 28, there's a whole list of curses that will happen if they start doing the sins that they did. These are going to apply to you. They're going to fall on you. And look at verse 36. The Lord will drive you and the king you set over to a nation unknown to you and your ancestors. So in a word, if you keep breaking my laws, my lovely people, I'm going to deport you out of your country. I'm going to kick you out of the nation that I've given you, right? And that's exactly what happened to the Jews. In the year 722 BC, so about 722 years before Jesus walked the earth, the Assyrian Empire, God used the Assyrians as a brutal, militaristic empire, but the world power at the time, they conquered, and then they kicked out the Jews of northern Israel. Well, actually, they deported a lot of them, and then they imported a lot of people. But basically, they conquered the northern kingdom. About 170 years later, God decided to apply the same judgment to the southern kingdom of Judah. And that's when he used the Babylonians to go in and conquer the southern kingdom of Judah in 3 stages. What happened was the Babylonians first put the Judeans under what's called a vassalage state, meaning they subdued them, but they didn't conquer them. They said, we're going to conquer you now because you've rebelled so many times. You've been such a problem. We're going to conquer you, but we're not going to destroy you. And as long as you as long as you don't rebel and you pay heavy taxes towards us, you can stay and you can have some limited autonomy, independence. Okay? And the Jews said, yep. And then they went on and proceeded to rebel several times. So finally, the Babylonians had enough with the Jews, and they said, okay, you've rebelled against us. We're going to deport you. And that's what happened. They took portions of the population, not all, but the most important people, like, for example, the Daniel was among those being deported, and the king, and also the royalty, and the most educated people. They kicked out the most educated, important, influential people so that Israel would be unable to rebel. So in the years 605, 597, and finally 586 BC, the Babylonians deported and then conquered Judah. And in fact, 586 BC is when the temple was destroyed. Okay, so in each of these years, the Jews were deported to where? Mesopotamia, which is between the Tigris and the Euphrates, where modern-day Iraq is. Why I bring this up is because it is believed that one of Hadassah's or Esther's relatives were deported during one of these phases. So maybe around the year 597 BC. So during the second Babylonian deportation of the Jews, that's when Esther and her relatives, or Mordecai's, we're going to learn soon, were deported into Iraq, which was at the time the Babylonian Empire. So this means that Esther was born in captivity, and probably spent her entire life in captivity. She actually never was in the land of Judah that we know of. In the year 539 BC, the Babylonian Empire that conquered Israel itself was conquered by the Persian Empire, by the modern, it's not Iran, but it's basically the Persian Empire. So they conquered the Babylonians, and they assumed control and power over the Jews. Now, this is important because the Persian Empire at the time, this is pre-Islamic empire. It's not the Muslims. The Islamic religion didn't come on the world scene until the 7th century AD. So this was pre-Islamic Persia. It's important to know here is the Persian Empire was very tolerant. They were a much more open, I wouldn't say open society, but they were more tolerant of conquered people groups. So they would conquer areas and they would leave them alone you could practice any religion you want, you could govern yourself, you could do anything you want as long as you pay taxes, we'll leave you alone. They didn't force a religion or a culture or a way of life or a language on the people. And that includes the Jews. So the Jews that were in captivity in Babylon, the Persians were actually pretty nice to them. Life actually was quite livable as a Jew over there. You could own a property. You could rise to levels of officialdom. You could be in fact, we had Daniel working for both the Babylonians and the Persians. You could rise to positions of rulership. You could be a magistrate. So life was actually pretty good for the Jews in Persia. So they were permitted pretty good freedom. So in fact, actually, this is kind of a bad thing, I would argue, because life got so good for the Jews in Persia, that they weren't really motivated to go back home when they were allowed to. You guys remember Cyrus the Great, King Cyrus the Great? Okay. In the year 538 BC, he said to the Jews, you know what? You guys can go home. You can go rebuild your temple. You can worship your God. We will leave you alone. In fact, we'll even help you. We'll provide you with some maybe escorts since some of you asked for it. Fine. How about it? And that's actually what happened. The Jews were allowed to go home in 3 different waves. But interesting enough, only a small percentage of the Jews went back. They didn't want to go back. They didn't want to go back to the homeland and worship their God and rebuild their temple. Most of them were, hey, we like Persia. It's good. We got garlic and rivers and all the modern delicacies of the Persian Empire. So I bring this up because Esther and her family and the characters, the good guy characters of this book, were among those that didn't want to go back home. They didn't want to go back to the temple, worship the Lord their God. They stayed in comfortable Persia. Okay, so just tuck that away for a moment. Okay, some interesting points about the Book of Esther. We don't know who the author of the book was, but it's somebody that had to have intimate access, an intimate understanding of the Persian Empire, because you could read it. There's a lot of details about the culture, the life, and the nature of the government. So it had to be someone that was intimately familiar with Persia, or probably lived in Persia himself, or whoever wrote it. It's also one of the 2 books in the Bible that doesn't mention God at all. So if you were to read cover to cover the Book of Esther, there's no mention of God whatsoever. Okay? Anyone want to guess what the other book is? There's no mention of God. Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon. Book of Esther, it's not even quoted in the New Testament. It's kind of interesting. And if you read through the Book of Esther, you'll notice that there's no mention, no discussion whatsoever of the Mosaic Law, of sacrifices, of prayer. There's mention of fasting, but you have no mention of that at all in the book. And what this could suggest, and what some scholars say, and I actually agree with it, is that kind of suggests something about the nature of the Jews in Persia, kind of as to their spiritual state. So if you have no mention of any praying or any reading of the Torah and any mention of going back home, none of that. So it kind of gives you an idea of maybe, just maybe, the Jewish state, the spiritual state wasn't that great. It was kind of lukewarm, okay? Life was so good in Persia, they were comfortable. One interesting point from the Babylonian Talmud, which is basically a Jewish text on, contains the oral Jewish law, and also commentary on the Bible, the Torah. It's an old ancient book. They note the Hebrew spelling of Esther, okay, the root words of Esther has there's a verb in Deuteronomy 31, which I'll put up in a moment, that says, I will hide myself. Hide. That word for hide, like I will cause myself to hide, has the same roots as the word Esther. Okay, the name Esther. So some people or some commentaries, especially ancient Jewish commentators, believe that there's a kind of a hidden meaning, like I will hide myself. So the title of the book is I will hide myself. Well, who's hiding themselves? Let's go to Deuteronomy 31. And in that day, I will become angry with them, I as God. I will be angry with them, my people, and I will forsake them. And I will, here it is, I will hide my face from them, and they will be destroyed. And I will certainly, here it is, hide my face in that day because of their wickedness in turning away to other gods. So who's doing the hiding? God. So maybe inside the name of Esther, I don't want to go too far with this, but maybe the book is about God is hiding himself. And we have no mention of God in the book of Esther, right? So maybe there's something to this. So maybe God's hiding himself from his people. So he's hiding himself from the Jews in captivity. So as we'll see, although he does not appear in the book of Esther, that doesn't mean that God was, and he was hiding, that doesn't mean that he wasn't at work. In fact, God was very much at work for his people behind the scenes, even though he was hiding himself from them. He was very much at work in the salvation of his people, like he always is. God doesn't change. He does get angry and he does judge people, but that doesn't mean he doesn't forgive, and he's not causing all things for the good of those who love him. So despite the spiritual state of the Jews at this time, which we believe to be kind of a faithless or maybe lukewarmness, God was still working for those people that rebelled, that got deported, and they're still in a state of spiritual apathy, but God's still working for them. He still loves them. He's still working out their salvation, even though they don't deserve it. It shows you the degree of which God will go to save mankind that doesn't deserve salvation. So a couple more historical points. Esther, all right, and her older cousin Mordecai are the two main good guys, or the protagonists in the story. They both, Esther and Mordecai, her cousin, they both descend from the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, the tribe of Benjamin. Later on, not today, next week most likely, you're going to hear of a name of a villain called Haman. Haman was a descendant, okay, follow me here, was a descendant of Amalek from Esau. So you have Jacob, Abraham, then Jacob, and then Jacob had two sons, Esau and Jacob, right? The descendant of Esau, a descendant of Esau was Amalek, and then finally was Haman. Esther and Mordecai were descendants of Jacob. So what this means is that in order to be Jewish, in order to inherit the promises of Abraham, you had to be a descendant of Jacob, not of Esau. So if I say, all right, if I ask people this, what's a Jew? And they say, well, it's a descendant of Abraham. No. Descendant of Isaac? No, it's a descendant of Jacob. Okay? The descendants of Esau were not Jewish inheritors of the promise. So why I'm bringing this up is because Esther's of the lineage of Jacob, whereas Haman was not. And they had a bitter feud between, the families had a bitter feud over the generations. Why? Because anyone remember that Amalek, or the Amalekites? Okay, again, Amalek is a descendant of Esau, not Jacob. And Amalek is the father of the tribe of the Amalekites. Who were the Amalekites? They were the first tribal nomadic group to attack the Israelites during the Exodus. So when the Jews left Egypt, were led by Moses, God says, let my people to the land. Amalekites, please leave them, let them pass. And they didn't. And the Amalekites, they attacked the defenseless Jews. They didn't have a standing army. They didn't have a nation yet. And because of this, God says, I'm going to judge this tribe. I'm going to judge the Amalekites. And that he would do later on with King Saul. Remember, King Saul was ordered to kill. They were put under what's called cherem, which means they were put under, you're set aside for destruction. That means that the Amalekites were ordered by God to be destroyed. Women, children, men, king, and all livestock. And God commanded Saul to do this. Saul's also of the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, that's important. What did Saul do? Anyone remember? Did he execute this command faithfully to the full credit? And no, you guys are shaking it. No, in fact, if you'll famously recall that the Bible says that he only executed part of the Amalekites. And that Saul, well, I'll spare the livestock for myself. In fact, I'm going to spare the king. And what was the king's name? Agag. That's going to be important later too, Agag. So God got real upset with this, and in fact, Samuel the prophet was real upset too. In fact, he got so mad that Samuel himself, a prophet, not a warrior, went and hacked to pieces King Agag. Again, this is important because Saul and the people that were used to judge the Amalekites were of the tribe of Benjamin. Haman was among the Amalekites. So what this means is that there was a major feud between those lines of descendants. And this would go on for 500 years, actually. So they would hate each other for 500 years. So you're going to see Mordecai and Haman kind of butting heads later on. And it's partly because of this history of hatred between the two, or actually one side against the other. All right, I know it's a little bit of history here, but you need to understand this because it'll help you understand the background of what's going on in the Book of Esther. So as mentioned, the Book of Esther is pretty readable, so I'm only going to highlight some portions of the text, and I'm going to try my best to just survey it because it's really readable, and I don't want to overdo it. The events take place in the years roughly 483 to 473 BC. So the Book of Esther occurs over a 10-year span, so roughly about 480 years before Jesus walked the earth. Anyone know the name of the king? It's easy. It's Ahasuerus. That's an easy one, right? Actually, or Xerxes. Have you ever heard of Xerxes? Yes. That's Ahasuerus is the Hebrew rendition of the Persian name of the king. And then Xerxes is what the Greeks called the king. Xerxes. So we're in the year 483 BC. The first Jewish wave has just, returning wave has just gone back. So meaning like the first wave of Jews were allowed to go home. Esther and Mordecai didn't go with them. They stayed in happy Persia. Okay. So let's go to chapter 1, Esther. Xerxes ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India all the way to Kush. That's probably India all the way to Ethiopia. Big empire, very, very big. It was the world power at the time. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. That's in modern-day Persia. I'll get into that in a moment. And in the third year of his reign, so he was reigning for 3 years, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media and princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. Okay, verse 4. For a full 180 days, he displayed his vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days. And this was done in the enclosed garden of the king's palace. For all the people, from the least to the greatest, were there in the citadel of Susa. Again, Persia is the world power at this time. Very wealthy. This is probably around the peak of its power. So it had land all the way from India down to Egypt. It was huge. It was a very wealthy empire, very prosperous, and very well organized, I should say. You notice that it said they had 127 provinces. They're called satraps, but they were broken up into portions of land, provinces that were individually governed by local governors who answered to the king. Very well organized. So the king decides to throw a major banquet at this place called Susa, which was one of the 4 capitals in the Persian Empire. Maybe it's one of the 4 seasonal capitals. And that was a very, very important city. And the reason for the king's throwing a banquet is not stated, but it could be that he's celebrating. It says he's celebrating his wealth, but maybe he was about to go in and attack the Greeks, and he wanted to throw an empire and have all the important officials of all the provinces come, and they could party, and then they can discuss the nature of the attack. And this would actually be one of Xerxes' downfalls, because it was only the Greeks that were able to repel the Persians. You guys remember the movie 300? Part of that was Xerxes. So anyway, okay, so let's go to next slide, please. So wine was served. Oh, that's fun. Wine was served in goblets of gold. Ooh. Each one different from the other. And the royal wine was abundant. Lots and lots and lots of wine. In keeping with the king's liberality. So there was wine. They were getting probably drunk. By the king's command, each of his guests was allowed to drink with no restrictions. For the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. How nice. Verse 9. And his queen, Vashti, she decided to throw a banquet for the women in the royal palace of Xerxes. So the queen wasn't there. She was throwing another banquet for the women. Okay, probably all the wives and the important officials of the provinces. Verse 10. On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, I'm not going to read their names, and he said, "Bring before me my queen, Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and to the nobles," okay, to the nobles, the rulers, and the important people of the provinces. I want to show her to them, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused. She refused to come. And then the king became furious and burned with anger. Now, if you know anything about Persian law, which we're going to see a little bit later, although he didn't put a seal, stamp on this, when a king was ordered someone to do something, you were supposed to do it. You couldn't just do whatever you wanted from the king's presence. You couldn't even enter the king's room without his permission. If you did that, if you walked into the king's room without being permitted, that's a death sentence. Here we have the queen, okay, one of the most important officials, if you want to call it that, refusing a king's command. What's more, is she's doing this in front of the king and the officials, all the rulers of the local provinces, right? So that's a really big thing. That's a really, really, really big no and slap in the face to the king. Why didn't she show up? You can only speculate, but it could be one that she was unhappy with all the drinking and the guests and all stuff. I find that hard to believe. Other people think that she might have been pregnant with Artaxerxes. and she didn't want to compromise her health or whatever. But in any case, it wasn't an acceptable reason, and the king was furious. This was embarrassing to him. So what's happening in his mind is like, if this woman does this to me in front of my officials, what message did that send to the officials' wives as well? She refused. She got a summons. She was at a banquet with the officials' wives. She got a summons, and the queen says, "No, I'm not going." So what does that say to the other wives there of the officials? Oh, if the queen of the land is disobeying her husband, we don't have to listen to our husbands too. So the king, furious, summons his eunuchs and asks them, "What should we do about this?" And they agreed, "Yeah, you know what, this is wrong. This is embarrassing to the king. She shouldn't have done this." And so they decided she needs to be deposed, removed from her position, meaning no more queen. Let's read what happened. Verse 19. Therefore, when he heard this, it pleased the king. The officials say, "Let him issue a royal decree, and it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of the king. Also, let the king give her a royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then, when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all this vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest." This could be kind of a dangerous thing to Vashti's doing, because if she will rebel in front of the king, that means that the women will rebel against their husbands, and that shows weakness in the leadership. So it could be politically dangerous in this type of government. If it's a democracy, we don't really mean, it's just embarrassing, because actually now if you have affairs, no one cares. But in that time, it's a different government, and that could be damaging. Okay, so verse 21. So the king and his nobles were pleased with this proposal, with his advice. So the king did as was proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each of the provinces in their own script, meaning their language, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler of his own household using his native tongue. So the king here issues a royal decree. It's kind of an important note here is when he issues something, it's with a seal of stamp. It's kind of like passing a law in our Congress. It becomes legally binding, and you can't change it unless a royal decree by the king himself. So it's irrevocable. So this is done. Vashti, she's no longer queen. No longer queen of the king. So now we have a job opening, right? Again, no mention of God so far, right? Did you see God in any of these texts or verses that we read? So no mention of this. This removal of Vashti is an important event that occurs in the Book of Esther. An important void has been created that God's going to use to do something really, really good. It doesn't seem like that on the surface, but God's going to be using that. Okay, chapter 2, verse 2, Later, when Xerxes' fury had subsided, then the king's personal attendants proposed, "You have a job opening here, king. You don't have a queen. Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king, virgins. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these young, beautiful women into the harem." You guys know what a harem is? Yep. It's basically a room for a collection of wives or concubines for the king. And actually, it's not just for sex and pleasure, which it was. It was actually a social institution that kings used to impregnate women so they could have descendants. They needed to have, loyal offspring that could succeed the empire, govern the empire. So it wasn't just pleasure, although it was that. So let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these young, beautiful women to the harem in the citadel of Susa. That's where probably Esther lived as well. Let them be placed under the care of Haggai, an eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the young women who please the king be queen instead of Vashti. And this advice appealed to the king. He liked it. I like this. And so he followed it. Who's going to reject that? Okay, verse 5. So then there was in the citadel, a Jew. Who's a Jew? It's a descendant of Jacob, not a Persian, one of the deportees, or the descendants of the people that were deported, a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin, named Mordechai, son of Yair, the son of Shimei, and the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. That means by the Babylonians. And then he was among captive the king of Judah. And Mordechai had a cousin named Hadassah. Who's that? That's Esther, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. And this young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was very beautiful. And Mordecai had her taken as his own daughter when her mother and father died. I want to stress this. Mordecai is a Jew, tribe of Benjamin. So was Esther, their relatives, their cousins. Mordecai's great-grandfather was the one deported. Mordecai is the great-grandson of this person. So he and Esther both probably grew up. They grew up in Persia. Mordecai, their cousins, even though it doesn't seem like it, they're actually just cousins, but Mordecai is quite a bit older than Esther. And so he treats Esther, he raises her as a daughter. And it's believed that Esther was at the most, early 20s, not very old at all. Very good looking woman. Early 20s. Okay, so far so good. Let's go to verse 8. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, meaning about Vashti, get out Ashti, and let's get some women in here. Many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa, and they were placed under the care of Hegai, the eunuch. And Esther was also taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Hegai, who had charge of the harem. And she pleased him and won his favor. Meaning I'll get to a second. Immediately he provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. That's kind of another important point, subtle. He provided her with special food. And he assigned her to 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem. So the kingdom was scoured for all kinds of pretty women. And I'll note that history records Persian women as being very, very pretty. In fact, how many of you know Alexander the Great? Yes, Alexander the Great, the Macedonian general. He was the one actually, he was Macedonian, half Macedonian. He took the Macedonian and Greek troops basically on behalf of Greece and conquered Persia. So Persia tried to conquer Greece but failed. 100 years later after this, Alexander the Great actually conquered Persia. And when he was in Persia, he made a famous comment that's recorded in history. The Persian women are torture to the eyes, meaning they are so pretty. When I look at them, they torture my eyes. That's himself. So that gives you an idea. The Persian women were absolutely gorgeous, drop dead gorgeous. So the fact that Esther is brought into the harem with a whole bunch of beautiful women and stands out amongst torturously beautiful women, that shows you something. And she's not even Persian. She's Jewish. Right? Take note of that. She just happens to gain favor. Now, it says that she pleased the eunuch, meaning he looked at her and says, wow, you really are beautiful. You have a nice form. And what's more, it wasn't just about beauty, because the king wouldn't want an airhead, annoying, chatterbox, woman that has no mannerisms. Probably she had to be intelligent. She had to be teachable. She had to be capable of learning certain things. Because remember, women couldn't just be harems inside the king. Maybe they do it for the sexual pleasure too. But also women were expected maybe to play musical instruments or be able to have conversations about history and philosophy, be able to dialogue with the king. It was supposed to be a woman that was well-rounded, beautiful, and all these things. So Esther probably had all these things. She had a figure, she had beauty, she had wit, she had charm, she had grace, enough to please the eunuch and says, you are a candidate. There's a lot of pretty women here, but no, she's too immature. No, she's just going to annoy the king. She's too childish. Out, go home. Again, of all the women in the kingdom, it wasn't just Persia, it was all the provinces, a wide, vast empire, but mostly in Susa. She stood out. But as I'm not going to read it here, but in the midst of this, Esther knew she got selected, she's a candidate now, because when you're selected in the harem, that means you're assigned a wardrobe. You get access to all the best perfumes, all the cosmetics. Yes, they wore cosmetics too, and you're assigned 7 maids. So it's not a bad thing. But she knew that she was selected. Like, I'm not Persian. I'm Jewish. She kept that part secret. In fact, Mordecai said, "Don't tell them who you are. Just go along with it. Go along with it." So Mordecai, a responsible elderly cousin, would check on her. He found out that she got selected. He would go visit the harem. How are you doing? How are you doing? Are you okay? Are you okay? Okay, let's go on to verse 12. So before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, into his chamber, whatever, she had to complete 12 months. Can you believe this? 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for women. I thought we were bad today. But 12 months. And then 6 months with oil and myrrh, and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. Wow. That's a lot, huh? And this is how she would go to the king, meaning a woman that's selected from the harem. Anything she wanted was given to her to take from. Anything was given her to take with her from the harem to go in the king's palace. Verse 14. This is important. In the evening, she would go there to the king, meaning to the king's place, and in the morning she would return. I'll explain this in a second. She would return back to the harem, and under the care of the eunuchs, the watchful eye of the eunuchs, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he pleased her, or she pleased him with whoever summoned. Okay, so what's happening here? When you're in a harem, okay, if you were selected to stay, you were provided, again, with an assortment of all kinds of perfumes and oils, an unlimited supply of beauty products at the king's expense. And you had 7 wardrobe women or whatever. And the eunuch who would oversee this would select women, or he'd say he would recommend women. Okay, there's this woman, this woman, this woman, this woman, this woman. Which one do you want, my king? And the king says, okay, I want that one. And then the woman who was selected would go, okay, I need to go to the wardrobe. I want all the cosmetics and all the perfumes, all the beauty stuff and take whatever you want. There's jewelry, gold, take it. Adorn yourself however you want. And then go to the king. And then she would go to the king at night, spend the night there, and come back. What spend the night mean? It doesn't mean play chess. All the Persians anyway, okay? My wife is saying no, but he would sleep with her. I'm bringing this because it's important. He would sleep with the woman, and then she would go back to the harem, right? And when she would return to the harem, she would stay there until the king would summon her again, if that ever happened again. Oftentimes, they would only have one sexual encounter, and that would be it for the rest of their lives. And then she would live in the harem, okay? Or if the king really liked her, summon her again. So it could be months or weeks, or depending on how much he delighted in her, it could be more regular than that. But oftentimes, it was uncommon for a woman to have an encounter with the king and never see the king again. And the woman was not allowed to go to the king's presence unless, this is important for next week, wasn't allowed to go into the king's presence unless he summoned her. All right, I know this is some history here, but hang in there. We're going somewhere with all this. So, some time went on. It's believed to have been this process of selecting women and preparing women probably occurred over a 2 or 3 year period. So Esther was in the midst of this. And then Esther was selected by the eunuch. Okay, you're one of us. You can be in the harem. Let's prepare you. You have to go through this 12-month training process. And then finally, let's go to verse 15. When the turn for Esther came, meaning the king's going to select her, to go to the king, she asked for nothing. You guys get that? From the harem. She asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, was in charge, suggested to her. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. And then she was taken to King Xerxes in the royal palace. Verse 17. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any other woman of the women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his officials and all his nobles. So Vashti refused it, Esther did not. So she got a nice party. And he proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts and royal liberality. Esther's now been selected, ladies and gentlemen. Now, no, it doesn't take much. You notice the women, when they be selected, right? If you're selected by the king, the most important man in the universe at the time, you'd be tempted to take whatever you can get and be as beautiful as you can possibly get. But notice Esther doesn't select anything. She just says, just give me whatever you recommend. What do you guys think about that? I don't have a really theological point behind this, but just what do you guys think about that? If you're, yeah, it probably means she was pretty confident in her looks, or she knew that, or maybe she just said, you know what, I am what I am. I don't know, but she knew she was beautiful enough to not have to garnish herself extra with makeup or adorn herself with makeup. She was confident, or at least, let's leave it there. So Esther is summoned by the king now, and then she goes and spends the night with the king. So most likely this means what? Slept with the king. Slept with the king. Now I want to note some things here. I'm gonna hit on this a few times. Notice that Esther won favor with the eunuch inside the harem. And then when she was selected, she won favor with all the people around her. All the people around her. All the men and the women in the courtyards. All the royalty, all the officials. She won favor. Finally, she's in the king's presence. And he was more impressed with her beauty, even though she didn't garnish herself as much as the others. In the midst of fierce competition, tortuously beautiful women, she was given favor. He said, oh, Her. It was as clear as day. All right, let's go to verse 19. So when the virgins were assembled a second time, this is maybe a closely related event sometime shortly after this, Mordecai, her cousin, was sitting at the king's gate. This is important. And then two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway became very angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. So two of King Xerxes are, and that's actually what would happen. I think it was about 10 or 20, I can't remember, 15, 20 years later. He actually was assassinated. But now there's a couple of officers that are planning the assassination. And Mordecai overhears this. But Mordecai found out about the plot, and then he told Queen Esther. Because Mordecai is probably an official himself, because given that he's in the king's yard, but he couldn't go up to the king directly. He had to be summoned. He had to know someone important enough that had the king's ear. And who was that? Oh, Queen Vashti. Esther. What a coincidence. I can go to my cousin, tell her, and then she can get the message sent to him. So he reported it to Queen Esther, who in turn reported that to the king. And then the king, you saved my life. You saved my life, Mordecai. And so when the report was investigated and found out to be true, the king didn't just kill him. He said, I need to find out if this is true or not, but it turns out to be true. You guys were going to kill me. The two officials were impaled. Oh, actually, I thought they were hung. You know what that means? Yeah. Oh, it's not just that. They would take probably about a 1-inch rod. This is a form of execution that the Persians employed. And it was believed that the Persians invented crucifixion because this is one of the ways they executed it. It's the way a lot of Muslims did it too. But basically, take a 1-inch rod, plant it into the ground, and you'd stake a person through his anus and shove him up through, and it'd puncture, navigate, whatever. And they were careful to make sure they didn't hit all the vital organs, so it prolonged death. And come out, the exit wound would be somewhere around here, and you'd sit on the stake until you die a miserable death. So that's what he just did. I thought he hung him, but wow. So the king was very unhappy. So then all this was recorded in the Book of Annals in the presence of the king. Annals. So again, around the second time, we have another gathering here on the concubine area, the harem area, and Mordecai just happens to be present when he hears this news. He just so happens to have access to somebody that has access to the king. And with this, the king is spared what? He's spared a death, spared an assassination attempt. We don't know why these people were trying to kill the king, but it might have been because this is the sometime after the king invaded Greece and failed. So he went back and he was embarrassed, and the officials didn't like this and they thought it's time to replace him. Who knows? So for the sake of time, I'm going to stop reading verses here, but I want to leave you with some thoughts and questions to ponder as we enter a little bit deeper, delve deeper into Esther next week. You should be able to answer these now, but what are the spiritual states, conditions of people like Mordecai and Esther? What was the overall spiritual state of the Jews in Persia? How was it? Probably, yeah, we can get some hints. In fact, let's step through some of this. Because when we think of Esther, we tend to think of a virtuous woman. Yeah, she was, but let's think about this for a minute. Where are Esther and Mordecai and all her Jewish neighbors right now? What country are they in? Persia. Why aren't they home in Judea, back at home when they could have gone home, worshiping the Lord their God in front of the temple that's being rebuilt? Or probably by now it's either partially rebuilt or it's functional enough where you can go worship. Why aren't they there? Probably lukewarm, probably complacent. Any mention so far of Mordecai and Esther praying or offering sacrifices? They may have, but it's not stated. I don't want to attack their spiritual states too hard because later on it's recorded that they do fast. But let's do something. What's more important? More important than what's not stated for here is what is stated. Notice that Esther herself allowed herself to become part of the harem. Now, I think the Hebrew word is snatched, like maybe she was pulled into it against her will, but commentators are unclear as to whether she was here in the harem against her will or, by choice. We don't know for sure. But that said, we don't see Esther throwing herself saying, no, I'm not going to defile myself. I'm going to leave. Kill me. Take my life. No record of her doing that. So my guess is that it was partly voluntary. And in fact, let me ask you a question. How many women do you think would be unhappy with this situation or being in the harem? I know no one wants to be a wife of a king, especially amongst other multiple women. How many women do you think were unhappy with this arrangement? Let's think about this for a second. This is a question for the women. You are snatched, let's say it's by force. By king's order, you are to come into the king's harem. Oh, but by the way, you can have all the wonderful, luxurious food you want, all the makeup you ever want, you can wear all the jewelry you want for the rest of your life. You never have to worry about poverty or anything ever again. You just have to be a, a concubine. How many women would refuse it? Yeah, I think it wouldn't be universally rejected. Let's put it that way. There's some women out there. Someone would say no, absolutely not. But then there's others that say, okay, I'll make a sacrifice. But anyway, Esther was part of this harem. Why didn't she rebel and say, no, I'm not doing this? What's more is, remember I said earlier that she partook of special foods. The foods in Persia probably weren't very kosher. I bet you that. In fact, remember King Daniel, Daniel famously rejected the food. He said, I'm not going to take this food because I'm going to defile myself. But any record of Esther saying no to the food? No. So she's a willing participant in the harem. She's eating probably non-kosher foods. And then she went and spent the night with the king most likely it was before she was married to him, right? So it's premarital sex. Okay. Let's say whether she did that or not, there's one thing that she did violate for sure. It's forbidden in Mosaic law for a Jew to marry a non-Jew. That's Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 to 4. It was prohibited for a Jew to marry a non-Jew, especially a pagan king. So Esther here is, I don't know, in a harem willingly, eating non-kosher foods, didn't go home to worship the Lord of God, now having sex with a king, not her husband, and later on would marry a pagan king. No. So all to say is that these data points here point to not the greatest, kind of a subpar spiritual state, or one that's secularized, to say the least. So that is, Esther and Mordecai and the Jews in Persia are kind of somewhat spiritually apathetic at best. They're secularized. They're not very religious, are they? So my suggestion here, and I think I'm getting this point here driven, is that the Jews weren't exactly in a great spiritual condition. Okay, is that clear? But that said, note the string of coincidences that are still happening, they're weaving through Esther and Mordecai's life. Vashti has been deposed, new job opening. Esther is selected of all the women. She then finds favor with the eunuch, and then she finds favor with all the officials, all the people around her, and then she finds favor with the king, and then she's made queen. And then coincidentally, her cousin Mordecai uncovers a plot and is able to work through this to save the king's life. Great favor. So that means now that Esther and Mordecai have great favor. Two Jews that are hiding their identity have great favor with the king. Are these a mere string of coincidences or acts of a God who's hiding himself? So notice I said that God's not mentioned here, and God is maybe hiding himself behind the scenes. So we have God seemingly working behind the scenes, hiding himself for a faithless people. So even though the Jews here, even though Esther and the Mordecais are not doing what they should be doing, and actually downright breaking, let's say Esther breaking Mosaic law, God says, I know, I'm not happy with this, but I have something good to do. I'm working through this. I'm hiding myself because they're in judgment right now, and they're still lukewarm. They're still not calling on my name. They didn't go home when I gave them the chance, but I'm still going to work for their salvation. I'm still going to do something very, very good. So what is God going to do? What is God up to? With that, I'll leave this as a cliffhanger, and we'll go into that next week. I just want to leave you with a note point here that these coincidences aren't really coincidences. These are mighty acts of a loving God working on behalf of a people that don't deserve it, a faithless people, a lukewarm people. That is by a God who is going to do good despite their sin, despite their hard-heartedness, despite their faithlessness. And that's the message I want to extract today. That's the God that we serve. Because even though we are at times faithless, rebellious, sinful, those that are called by his name, those that have put their faith in the Christ, God causes all things to work to the good for those who know him, who love him, even when we're faithless. When we're faithless, God is still faithful. When you blow it, God's still faithful to you. When you sin, God's still faithful. God still works things out for your good. Even though you say you want to do something great for God, but you turn around and you go the wrong direction, you sin big time, what does God do? Not only does he forgive you, he says, okay, I'm going to take that sin, which I never intended, and I'm going to cause it to do something really, really good for you and for my people. So think of it. That's a promise that God's made, and you have to think about that for a little bit. If you're not a believer in God, you don't have a relationship with God, all things are not going to be worked out for your good. If you are a believer, God will turn it. It may not be a painless thing. It might be a painful session of learning. That's the good thing that you're going to experience. But you have rest assured. That's one thing I want to leave with you before I just closes. God causes all things to work out for your good. You guys get that? If you're a believer. So let's close. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the message of Esther. And one thing that we learned is that you do hide your face. That's clear. That is clear. But you don't stop working on behalf of those that know you and that love you. As we're seeing right here in Esther, it's becoming more and more manifest and apparent. So we ask you, Lord, to implant this truth in our hearts so we can just trust in you and delight in you, know that all things, so even good things too, not just bad things, but good things are working out for our good, meaning for our salvation, for our sanctity, for our purity, for our restoration, for the good of the kingdom. Doesn't necessarily mean like wealth, but those can come, but the big thing is it's the status of our souls. You work out all things so that we can become more like Yeshua, so we can dine with him in heaven. It's going to be even a bigger party there than what Xerxes could throw. So let this truth sink in. I pray this in Yeshua's name. Amen. Okay, receive this blessing, first in Hebrew, the Aaronic blessing, and then in English. This is for you from the Father. Yavarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'el Adonai panav elecha v'yuchanecha, Yisrael Adonai panav elecha v'yasim lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. With that said, shalom, and we'll see you next week. Amen.